Good afternoon, everyone. Today we do the study or the pedagogy of the oppressed. I'm not going to start now. I know there's people that are coming in that are still logging into the Facebook page. I would like to wish all the moms, all the aunts, all the grannies, all the uncles, the stepfathers that are looking after our children, a happy Mother's Day. I hope today is filled with love. I hope you know that you are appreciated. I hope you know that South Africa loves you and that you contribute far more than you think you contribute. The world is a better place when children are taken care of, when children are going to school, when children are able to access love, and love is everything, and children love and thrive on love. So we thank you so much, and we wish you a happy Mother's Day. The book we're about to delve into is a book that I feel it's anyone's interpretation of what they find from it, but I think it's a book that I think it empowers. I think it opens up your mind. I think it's a book that you really tend to value who you are and to tend to value what the system that you're dealing with is like. At the same time, I'd like us to be aware that at the moment we're facing a pandemic. We're facing a COVID-19, which is a virus that kills, a virus that doesn't know discrimination, but will get us. So please, if you're at home, keep on continuously washing your hands. Keep on continuously sanitizing. If you have to go out for essential things, keep a safe distance, wear your mask, make sure that you're safe from harm, and always keep sanitizing. We cannot emphasize that anymore. This is a respiratory disease and it kills. And we don't want to see ourselves, especially the disadvantaged who have no choice sometimes but to go find food, to die. In a moment, I'm going to start going through the book. I'm just hoping that everybody is in and is watching. And then we can get through, and I'd love to hear what you have to say. Perhaps your view may be different from mine. This is a book that I'm going to read and keep reading for a very long time. It's one of those that it stays with you and it reminds you of your positioning in life. It reminds you that you also have the power to be better. You have the power to work towards the elimination of control from the oppressor. And it allows you to understand that you cannot just be complacent, but you have to be part of the fight. Because if one of us is not free, then none of us are free. If women are not free, then none of us are free. Black people are not free, none of us are free. So I'm going to start with the book. The book is called The Pedagogy of the Oppressed. It's written by Paulo Freire. And this is basically just my summary of the things that I learned from him, or I learned in the book. It's a pretty long book. It's a book that really needs you to go back and to keep reading it and to keep understanding it and keep finding yourself in it, because it's really powerful. This book, there's an author in one of the versions who wrote, this book is dedicated to the oppressed and those who suffer with them and those who fight at their side. In one of the versions of his book, the author of that book, of the version of the book, writes, Paulo's denunciation or hate for oppression came from a real place, and there's nothing pseudo-liberal about it. It was real. They're also going to say that Paulo represents the response of a creative mind and a sensitive conscience of the oppressed around him. So who was this Paulo Freire? Paulo was named Paulos Regulus Neves Freire. He was born in Brazil, so I may not have pronounced his names properly, on the 19th of September in 1921. And he passed on the 2nd of May in 1997. Paulo lived a life that was one of having semi-class representative. He also knew poverty. Paulo was exiled at some point from Brazil, but eventually he went and died there in Brazil on the 2nd of May 1997. He was an educator and an author, and he wrote quite a few books, and amongst of which is this one called The Pedagogy of the Oppressed, and that book was published in 1968. I know yesterday I said 1967, but it's actually 1968. Paulo grew up in Brazil, and his life influence was greatly influenced by, his life experiences was greatly influenced by who he became as a man. Some may understand the pedagogy of the oppressed. Even the word itself is very daunting. The pedagogy of the oppressed. What is the pedagogy of the oppressed? You have to understand what pedagogy is. Pedagogy is a method, a practice of teaching, especially as an academic subject or theoretical concept. So basically, Paulo is saying, let us study what oppression is. Let us dissect what oppression is. Let us see how we get out of oppression as those who are oppressed, and includes himself in that, because in fact all of us are oppressed. In short, Freire states that education should be a practice of freedom instead of a practice of dominance. He states that the goal for education or of education is to adapt people to their oppressive conditions. Teachers attempt to control your thinking, and students are treated as passive recipients or objects. So basically, I come here and I tell you this is what it's like, and as my student, you assimilate that as it is, where in fact it shouldn't be that way. Freire proposes an approach to education that aims to transform oppressive structures by engaging people who have been marginalized and dehumanized, and drawing on what they already know. So this book is in 4 chapters, and I'm going to go through it in chapter by chapter. And as I said before, this is a learning curve for me and a learning curve for both of us. So I don't know any better than you know, and I appreciate any kind of input, any kind of any kind of expression that you have, maybe that you want to input in terms of this dialogue. In chapter 1, Freire uses this chapter to explain why pedagogy is necessary. Here he describes humankind's central problem as affirming one's identity, which is human. Freire states that everyone's desire is to be seen. As women, we want to be seen. As Black women, we want to be seen. Black men want to be seen. Everybody wants to be seen. But oppression prevents many people from realizing this desire. This interruption is termed dehumanization. And when individuals become objectified, this occurs due to injustice, exploitation, and oppression. And I don't think there's any South African right now who can say they don't affiliate or understand what that is. The pedagogy of the oppressed, Freire attempts to help the oppressed to fight back, to regain their loss to humanity, and to achieve full humanization. Paulo says humanization has always been our problem as human beings, which is funny because you're born human. So our humanity should never been an issue since we were born. However, it's always been an issue because there's always an oppressor versus the oppressed. And that's because because we recognize what it is to be dehumanized, what we want is to be human. Paulo cautions that whilst it's normal to fight to be humanized, to fight against oppression, we must be wary of becoming oppressors ourselves, but rather restorers of humanity, of both the oppressor and the oppressed. And I think anybody who has been poor, anybody who has had somebody trample on them, anybody who has had to go without, should understand what it feels like to be without, to not have, to lack. And that person then should be able to think for the other person who's been in the same situation. So by saying that you understand what the other person's going, understand all the way through. And what most of us want is to be human, is to be seen. To liberate myself is to liberate all, including the oppressed. That's what anybody, and that's what all of us should carry in our hearts. Paulo says almost always in the initial stages of the oppressed, instead of striving for liberation, we tend to ourselves then become oppressors. To them, to be a man or human of stature is to be an oppressor. Almost like the story of the book in Animal Farm. I mean, Animal Farm started out as a group project in which everybody wanted to partake. Everybody understood that they were all oppressed. Everybody knew that, the animals had rights. But at the end of the day, the ones who liberated them then became the oppressors. So he cautions against that as well. A pedagogy of the oppressed is a critical discovery that both the oppressed and the oppressors are manifestation of dehumanization. So ours is to liberate ourselves by overcoming the oppressor, but our aim should never be to be like the oppressor, changing from one to the other to be fully human. As in the book Animal Farm, being fully human is to understand love, is to be love. And though we want to overcome oppression, we still need to understand that we ourselves need to understand humanity. It's easy to be the oppressor once you've overcome oppression, and it's easy to oppress others because now you see yourself as better than the other people. In chapter 2, in this chapter, Freire outlines his theories of education. He elaborates on what he believes to be what he terms the banking model. The banking model is really quite serious in that it's something that's been used in South Africa for a very, very long time. In fact, across the world, we assimilate what you see on TV, what we see everywhere. It's basically banking. We are taking it in and we are assimilating it and becoming that. Freire highlights how there is one-way transfer of information. So the teacher is the individual that recites all the facts and ideas while other people listen and memorize, and that's what they think is everything. This manner of teaching does not encourage students to question the information that they receive. Students lack the freedom to question their teachers and their teachers of the world, basically. Essentially, it dehumanizes the student. Freire proposes that the banking model must be replaced by a problem-solving model, which will empower all students. The key word here is narrative. The teacher provides the narrative and the students ingest the narrative. A narrative is a thought process. It's an idea. It's a way to approach something. It's called a narrative. So the banking system of education and those they consider to know For instance, the project being so the projection is that they're ignorant. So it's like the student is ignorant and the teacher is the wise one who's explaining to the student that this is the way because you don't know any better. So I will give you the narrative of what we're talking about. The teacher sees himself as above his students. And so he is in the oppressor-oppressed role. So the students are oppressed and the teacher is the oppressor. Because here the teacher considers the students to be ignorant. Paulo says education must solve and reconcile the teacher-student contradiction. There should be no polar ends because both the student and the teacher are one and the same. The banking system works very well for the oppressor because the student, who is the oppressed, remains in the dark. The oppressor then seems humane in imparting his knowledge, but is in fact dehumanizing the student. So the teacher is in a position of power saying, here, I'm giving you this information, which you didn't know. So you should be grateful for what I'm giving you. But who's coming up with that narrative? Obviously, it's the teacher. And the student is the one that's assimilating it. So it's basically banking. So you're keeping that information that is yours to have. Be grateful for what I'm giving you, and that the banking system doesn't work. On chapter 3, here Freire explains the importance of the word. He states they must reflect both action and reflection. Dialogue is an understanding between human beings. It's an act of love between humanity and faith. Freire explains that the oppressed usually are not problems of their own time, and the oppressors feed off this ignorance. I'm going to repeat that. He says he explains that the oppressed usually are not able to see the problems of their own time, and the oppressors feed off this ignorance. He emphasizes the importance of educators not becoming oppressors. He explained that educators shape how the students see the world and history. Educators and students must work together as a team to find problems through history and through the present. When I read this chapter, I think chapter 3 really touched me in a way that I think we've all been speaking of bringing things to the fore, actions bringing words, bringing things to life. And there's a verse in the Bible, and I'm sorry to quote this for atheists or non-conforming to Christianity, but he quotes this from the book of John. And in the book of John, there's a passage there that says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. I'll repeat it again. It says, in the beginning, there was the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And Paulo talks about the Word. And for something to exist, it must first be a word. A word without action is merely a reflection, and therefore it's meaningless. A dialogue does not exist in the absence of love for people, a love for the world, and by abolishing oppression, you restore love. A dialogue requires humility. How do I go into a dialogue when I only recognize myself as a thinker? If I don't embrace the contribution of others, if I'm afraid to feel incompatible with the dialogue requires faith in each other as mankind, and that we will revolve and recreate. We have the power to recreate and transform. A banking kind of educator doesn't concern himself with dialogue, and he answers his own question. Now, we really have to think about the word. Paulo says the word, and I'll probably repeat this as we go along. He says that the word is said. So I will say a word, and I will say let there be light. But if I don't act towards having that light, that means the word is none and void. So first there needs to be a word. As the oppressed, there needs to be a stance to say, we are tired of this. But as if it's merely a reflection to say, we are tired of this, then what good is that word? It's just a word that's basically gone under the water. You can say, I want for my life to be better. I want women who are able to walk through the streets of South Africa without being bullied, without being raped, without being killed. I want to stand in a meeting as Uyoliswa and say, this is my thought, and I believe this thought is viable. I want to be able to do that. But I cannot do that if I'm going to sit and be silent and say, this is the word that I'm saying as one who's oppressed, and not follow up with a reflection. Now, with the reflection, I gathered a reflection is what steps are you taking towards that? And I think having understood Freire to be a person who's been poor, a person who's endured a lot of pain in his life, who's had the other side where the privilege has been there, who's been ostracized from his own, who's dedicated his life to then saying, okay, I'm going to teach my own people. For me, it's an inspiration. It means don't say a word. Don't mention a word if that word is not accompanied by action. Any word, for it to breathe life, needs to be accompanied by action. And that's why I fell in love so much with chapter 3, because he speaks to that, in that dialogue and words and speaking and bringing things to life is basically what we should be about as the oppressed. And I don't care if you are a Black person with money. I don't care if you're a poor Black person. I don't care if you're a woman. I don't care if you're a rich woman having made it in the corporate world. But at the end of the day, as the oppressed, we're still the oppressed. There's always the oppressor. So you think the word, you say the word, you say it to yourself. And therefore, that's how you acquire freedom. Paulo says, often educators and politicians are misunderstood in their language because their language is not attuned to the situation of the people that they address. And I'll tell you that most history scholars would tell you this. For me, I chose not to study history. So EFF has educated me in a lot of ways of understanding where do you come from. Where are you going? And science for me was a way of solving issues. So I looked at it in a different way, that if I can have a mathematical equation, maths and science were my thing, and if I can prove it to be this, then for me, I've done my job. So language is other of educators, sometimes they miss the point. So historians will tell you a story that you obviously cannot see it as your own. This is what is called rhetoric. So a language, you hear that language is spoken in this way, and language of politicians in this way. It's rhetoric. It doesn't mean anything. It's what they want you to think is what it is. What's important is people, through education, for people to feel like masters of what they're thinking, to discuss this thinking and their view of the word. So that's what education is. So if you're learning science, if you're learning history, if you're learning English, if you're learning accounting, what is your view? And you'll find out most of I'm going to make examples, perhaps I'm wrong, but you'll find that most people who are creators, most inventors. I remember a time where I was studying mechanical engineering. I did not finish it, I dropped out. But there were students who were actually manufacturing a car. And I couldn't understand to myself because the tools we had been given, according to myself, would never have made me worthy or made me think of how to create an engine. So which information do they have? Which means perhaps they are born differently with an understanding that they are able then to assimilate things differently and think outside the box. But if you're from the oppressed, you take what you're given and you think that is black and white. Banking system. We've been victims of the banking system as Black people through our education. Whether you're in a model ski school, whether you are in a privacy disadvantaged school, we've all been a product of what it is to be part of the banking system. Because at home, our parents don't know any better. At home, our parents are too busy trying to earn a living for us to go to school. At home, our parents are in another oppressive state of theirs where they're being paid less than their counterparts. So it's a lot, it's a lot to take in. This is the pedagogy of the oppressed, basically, in which the oppressed must participate. And you need to understand that you are the oppressed. And once you understand that you are the oppressed, then you understand that actually the pedagogy of the oppressed is quite necessary. Hold on, Siri is playing with me now. Okay, the last paragraph in this chapter, I found, which I found to be powerful. This is what it says. It says, the important thing from the point of view of a libertarian education is for people to come to feel love, masters of their own thinking, by discussing and thinking and views of the world explicitly and implicitly manifest their own suggestion and those of their comrades. I'm going to read this again. The important thing from the point of view of a libertarian education is for people to feel masters of their, to feel that they're masters of their thinking by discussing the thinking and the views of the world explicitly and implicitly, and manifest their own suggestion and those of their comrades. Because this view of education starts with the conviction that it cannot present its own program, and it must sear for this program dialogically with the people. It serves to introduce the pedagogy of the expression in the elaboration of which the oppressed must participate. So basically this says the important thing from the point of view of the libertarian education is for people to come to feel love and that they are masters of their thinking by discussing the thinking and views of the world explicitly and implicitly, and manifest their own suggestion and those of their comrades. So it's gotten us to a point where we have to think for ourselves, not through the banking system, which tells us this is what is supposed to happen to you. This is what the world is. This is what you assimilate. Violence, Black people are violent. You see it on TV all the time. Black people are crooks. Black people are gangsters. Black politicians cannot be trusted. That is the oppressor giving you information on what you are supposed to learn from that. But what is your analysis? What are you learning from it? You have to think outside the box. Okay, the next slide. right. Now we're going to move to chapter 4. In this chapter, the process of how the oppressed can truly liberate themselves is laid out. He explains the method used by the oppressor to impede the realization of humanization by the marginalized. He terms the tool used by the oppressor as anti-dialogical. That means the oppressor doesn't want to dialogue with you. He terms the tools as anti-dialogical actions, and he states that to overcome the oppression, you need to use dialogical actions. So when they don't want to engage, you have to engage. And there are 4 methods in which they used, and we call them anti-dialogical actions. They are divide and rule, cultural, invasion, manipulation, and conquest. And I think I need to explain this, that sometimes there's a part in Paulo's book where he says, at times we want to overcome the oppressor so much that we become the oppressor. And for me, that rang true because we have a government that formed or is run by a former liberation party, a government that was supposed to then liberate us as South Africans, understand the oppressive history that we come from, understand the tools that were given to us as Black people, understand the disadvantages that we face, where we have no houses, we have no money, we have no savings, we have no education, we have no sense of self. But it's easy to become the oppressor yourself. So once you fight so hard, the oppressor, there's a time where some then become the oppressor because now they've regained that power from the oppressor, and they then want to exercise that power over another form of oppressor, forgetting where they come from. And he's got this 4 anti-dialogical actions that the oppressor does. And I think you might find some of those examples in a few of what I'll mention today. In this chapter, Paulo starts by affirming that we are not like animals. He says that animals are just being of pure pure activity. So animals are born, they live the world as they're born. But we've been given something as humans. He says animals coincide with the world. They're within the world. They just live in the world. But he says humans, though, emerge from the world. And then they objectify it. They name it, and then they transform it through their actions. So if you remember in chapter 3, he mentioned the word. If you look in chapter John, there was the word, and the word was there, and the word was with God, and the word was God. So for human beings, they are born into the world. They see the world. They name the word. If you've ever had a baby, you can see how a baby grows up. A baby grows up and he says he's born. So he feeds off the world. He's like looking everywhere, trying to see what is there in front of him. He names things as he hears them. Mama, Tata. He names them, and then he can transform with the world, through the world as he sees it. So you can have two children, but those two children can go different places because of how they view, name, and see the world. Again, we see that the word is in two parts. The word is, you name the word, but the word is null and void up until you reflect on the word. And you say, this is the word, this is a laptop, but the laptop can just be a laptop. But what can it do for me? So I tend to think, what is this laptop good here for? The laptop is there for me to do my work. How do I use this laptop? So it's a matter of us using our minds, and anybody and everybody is able to use their minds to question, to ask, to experiment. And that's what basically he's trying to say. He says, Paulo quotes again Vladimir Lenin from his book, What is to be Done? And he says, Lenin says, without a revolutionary theory, there can be no revolutionary movement. Paulo says this means that a revolution is achieved by neither verbalism or activism, but rather a praxis. And such word I've learned through the EFF myself. A praxis is an action that's derived from theory. So it's like the word. So I have a theory, but the theory needs an action. So that's what the praxis is. So revolutionary praxis or action cannot tolerate an absurd dichotomy in which the praxis of the people is merely that of following leaders' decisions. A dichotomy, and what is a dichotomy? It's a division or contrast between two things. A dichotomy which is reflecting the prescriptive methods of the dominant elites. I'll repeat that. It says, revolutionary praxis cannot tolerate an absurd dichotomy in which the praxis of the people is merely that of following leaders' decisions. A dichotomy which is reflecting of the prescriptive methods of the dominant elites. We can't do that. A revolutionary praxis is a unity, and leaders cannot treat the oppressed as positions. Paulo says a dialogue with people is not a favor that you do to them. They should never be used to dominate. A dialogue is a precondition of true humanization. A revolutionary process is eminently educational in character. It involves openness. He says, and he quotes Lenin again, and Lenin says, the more a revolution requires theory, the more its leaders must be with the people in order to stand against the power of oppression. And I think that it's very powerful, this part of the book, because he basically says that you need to see people as people, and you need to understand that we are people. And if I go and say I'm going to do groundwork, and in this groundwork, I'm here to tell people about their current situation and a way in which that they can do better. And this is mostly used during voting times. People go door to door. They go tell people, no, this is what the EFF can do for you. But if I look at those people, and I see myself because I have lipstick on, because I live in a house that's got cement around it, and because I drive a car, because I English well, but I see these people as lesser than myself. It defeats the whole thing. That means I'm disingenuous in my role, to liberate the oppressed, if I then see myself as better than oppressed, because it even says somewhere in this book, sometimes the teacher, while he teaches, tends to see himself above the students, forgetting that him and the students are actually in one position. We are all oppressed. There's no one who's better than the other. There's nobody who has advanced a state of no oppression. There is oppression, and whether and die tomorrow, my children will be oppressed. State as it is an oppressive state. It does not love my children, it does not see my children, and it does not appreciate. The history that they have is not their own. It's a history that's written for them, and therefore that I believe, because I have now become a member of parliament, that then I'm free and my children are free, because they're not. They're still living in a world that does not see them, a world that does not love them, a world that does not want them to know who they are, and a world that does not warrant for them to be better than who they can be, a world that wants to keep them where they are. And we've got, unfortunately, a party that was supposed to be a liberation party, absolutely supporting that, absolutely behind it. At a time like the COVID, we've seen how people are pushed to the back. We are pushed to look for crumbs. We are pushed to not see ourselves as people, but rather scrounge for food parcels, rather scrounge for 350 rand, rather scrounge for job opportunities, rather pray to God that we don't get fired. That is who we are as a Black people, the oppressed, because the oppressed are mainly us, Black people, Black women, child-headed homes. That's where we are at. So he names anti-dialogical actions that are dealt with by the oppressor to conquer those that are oppressed. This means that someone has to be conquered, and the conqueror makes this his conquered. The dispossessed are rid of not only their economy, their culture, their word, but also their forms of expression are taken from them. Oppression has then set in. That's it. What we would call then colonization. I'll repeat that again. It says the dispossessed in a conquest, which happened in 1652. The dispossessed are rid of not only their economy, their culture, their word, but also their forms of expression are taken from them. Oppression has then set in. Then there's another way the oppressor comes and oppresses and further entrenches themselves into the system, and that's called divide and rule. And I think we're all familiar with the prospect of divide and rule, and I think divide and rule has worked very well for the white monopoly capital, because we are very busy fighting each other politically, which is well, fair and good, because the ANC should be providing for its people. It promised to provide for its people. As the opposition, we must challenge it to fight for its people. However, white monopoly capital is then using that to entrench itself within the ANC and say, look, these people, they want, they are bought by this and that, and they are only howling because they're not getting what they want. Divide and rule, here the minority oppressor dominates the majority, and we all know who the minority oppressor is. And if you can think back and ask yourself, why is it that a minority is in charge of the majority? It's because of resources. It's because we're broken down. It's because we don't have. It's because we don't have a history. It's because we don't know who we are. It must, if it wants to sustain its power, divide it and keep it divided. And I think people here, that's where they don't understand what the CIC is saying when he says, an African is my brother. a Zimbabwean man is my brother. A man from Mozambique is my brother. A woman from Tanzania is my sister. A woman from Nigeria is my sister. A Tsonga man is my brother. A Zulu man is my brother. Xhosas are my nation, but I'm within a diaspora. I'm within people that mean me. And this minority has actually managed to divide us through xenophobia. It's managed to divide us through making us hate each other, which if you really want to explain, you cannot explain why Africans are the ones who hate each other. Why it is when we speak of foreigners, we speak about Nigerians, we speak about Zimbabweans, we speak about Mozambicans, we speak about everybody else but the European Italian man that's just down the street. Everybody but the Irish man who lives just behind you. And we speak about everybody else but the American student who goes to your school. That's not a foreigner to you. That's something to be looked at, wanting to be affiliated with, wanting to be better than. Whereas what we should be looking at is what the oppressor is looking at. And they've managed to divide us. And this is why EFF speaks of one Africa, a non-divided Africa, an Africa that speaks to itself, that knows its own problems, that solves its own programs, that has a currency that rivals other currency. And that is that's where the oppressor is winning. And we keep saying over again that we are one Africa. We're all Africans, and we should be looking at others as brothers and sisters. The minority, in order to weaken the oppressed, must isolate them, create and deepen rifts among them. And I think the minority here has done an amazing job at that. And up to us, the oppressed, to say, look, we are in the world. Let us identify the world. The word is that we are xenophobic. What are we going to do with our xenophobia? What are we going to do about our African brothers and sisters? What are we going to do about the situation that we're in? What are we going to do with the situation in Sudan, in Congo? What are we going to do about the situation in Senegal? What are we going to do about the poverty that we see in Africa? We cannot think of that. All we think about is that they're here to take our food. They're here to take our resources. We're all in the same box. We are all oppressed. Another tool that the oppressor uses, and when we say it's anti-dialogical, it means that you can't, there's no dialogue, it's done. It's what it is, it's done. What they do is manipulation. Almost like divide and rule. It's an instrument for conquest. By means of manipulation, the dominant elite try to use the masses as their object. So the greater the political maturity of the people, the more easily the latter can be manipulated, the latter being the oppressed, by those who do not want to lose their power. I noticed something, and I think I want to use this because I always complain about it, but I really have never had a platform to talk about it. The voting system. Have you ever seen, I live in a suburb in Overbarkens in Port Elizabeth, and there is a VD close by my house. It's an ETC center. And whenever we go there, white people literally wake up at 4 o'clock and they go and they vote. Our people do not vote. Our people do not understand their rights to vote. Our people do not understand their right to cast a vote. They don't understand that by casting a vote, you can cast a vote as a protest. You can cast a vote as an affirmation. You can cast a vote as a retaliation, but you must cast the vote. And that is why people complain day in and day out about the situation that is in South Africa. I was deployed in the Eastern Cape. There are no roads in the Eastern Cape. There's no electricity in the Eastern Cape. There's no jobs in the Eastern Cape. There's no industry in the Eastern Cape. There is no jobs, nothing. Our people are eating umqa namanzi, pap and water, and that's the staple food that people think that they should or they deserve. The greater the political maturity of the people, the more easily they are manipulated by those who do not want to lose their power. So the ANC will come to your house and tell you about Nelson Mandela and what he did for you for the liberation struggle. Nelson Mandela was there for you. He died for you. If you don't vote, you're not going to get your grant money because they're playing on your ignorance. If you do not vote, you're not going to get water. They're playing on your ignorance. And unfair. And I mentioned the ANC on purpose because remember I said we have the oppressor who oppresses us. So we've got the minority elite that oppresses the people, and then we've got those who think they've moved on from oppression and now in charge of revolution, but to them they still want to oppress. So we are in a situation where we've got a party that has the power to change the situation for us. But now this party is thinking, no, you want now to be the bosses, as in Animal Farm. The pigs became men. The pigs wore suits and spoke like men and drank tea and became like their former masters. And that is what Paulo is talking about, in that the essence of pure and revolution is to become humane, and you can only become humane through love, and you can only love what you see, and what you love is your brother. You can only see others as your brothers and sisters. So we're in a situation where we are losing ourselves. We are losing our own people who are supposed to assist and help us. We are losing knowledge. We don't have voting knowledge. We don't have education. Our education system is in tatters. Our health system has been exposed more than ever now through the COVID, that it's in pieces. And this is because we used to be brothers and sisters being oppressed in pre-1994. But now we have a new form of oppressor who's oppressing us through not giving us information, through not giving us resources, through not equipping us, through not thinking about what the generations will say and do. Then there's another one of cultural invasion. So he says, with cultural invasion, the invaders penetrate the cultural context of another group with total disregard of what that potential is. They impose their own view of the world upon which they invade and inhibit the creativity of the invaded by curbing their expression. Paulo says cultural invasion is an act of violence to those who lose their originality. In cultural innovation, the invaders are the authors of the story, they're actors in the history, and those that they invade are the objects. The invaders act, those that they invade have an illusion of acting in the story, but in fact, the story is not about them. The story is about invaders. And this speaks greatly to the history that is fed to our children. This speaks greatly to what we see on TV. As I said again, we're seeing black people are murderers. We're seeing black people are lootists. We're seeing black people are corrupt. We see ourselves as corrupt. We see our brothers and sisters as corrupt, because history has never been told from a point of view of a black person. History has never been told from a person who looks like me and you. History has never made a hero of a forefather who's like me and you. We've always been conquered. And this is what an oppressor does. And unfortunately, they've done a good job, because our education system has done nothing to decolonize education, to make sure that through education, that's how you feed your children. That's how you nourish patriarchy. That's how you nourish self-esteem. That's how you nourish how they know themselves. And most people, they go into jobs, and the reason I joined the EFF was because I never wanted my sons to be employed by virtue of a BE scorecard. I never wanted my sons to be seen in someone running because they see them as black men. Meanwhile, a man is just jogging. I never wanted for my children to feel inferior to anybody. This is their land, they're born in it, they own it, it is theirs. And that's why EFF and its ideologies, for me, really spoke to me and exposed to me that this is the party of the people, and this is the party that truly will take us forward in terms of us understanding who we are. And this EFF book club has really empowered me also in understanding a different idea, a different view of things. Book specifically is a book that I will go to time and time again if I want to refresh my memory, and I suggest that you do too. It's a beautiful book. It's a book that I think everybody should read. Okay, and let me go on. There is another form of oppression. It's called okay, wait. So he says those are the four anti-dialogue tools that the oppressor uses. But now there are ways in which to counter that. And he says cooperation, conquest and the conquered, I think, dominance over subjects. He says cooperating subjects need to meet to name the world in order to transform it. He says this can only be achieved through communication. Revolutionary leaders of the oppressed need to commit to freedom. He says unity for liberation, unity of the leaders under the oppression is of utmost importance. Organization, meeting together, this needs to be a constant, humble, and encouraging. It needs to be encouraging to witness the emergence of men and women to avoid an anti-dialogical control. Consistency, boldness, radicalization, courage, and faith are key ingredients in any organization. So what does Freire say to teach us as I'm about to finish? As the oppressed and the landless and dispossessed, we are denied our humanity. The dehumanization is reinforced through education. We've seen with Bantu education, we saw with Roads Must Fall and Fees Must Fall protests. We see it how black children are treated in Model C schools. I was once a product of that, and I can tell you that it's not very nice. And how schools in townships are grossly underfunded compared to schools in the suburbs. The education pedagogy as it stands does not teach our children the necessary information required to obtain freedom. Audre Lorde also states, you cannot dismantle the master house using the master's tools. Asata says, no one in the world has gotten their freedom by appealing to the moral sense of people who oppress them. To obtain freedom, we must unite and create a strong sense of community. Furthermore, we must ensure our children receive a free, decolonized education. And in turn, we must equip ourselves with political education so that we have the tools to liberate ourselves. And once again, I want to thank the EFF Book Club for this amazing opportunity. It's been beautiful for me to be a part of it. I've learned so much. I've learned so much from the previous speakers that have spoken. And once again, we are fighting a very deadly disease. It is killing. It is there. It's in the air. If you walk to your neighbor's house, you might catch it. Stay at home if you don't have to go anywhere. Wash your hands thoroughly. Keep hygienic. Wear your mask if you have to go out, and stay safe. Most of all, we have to educate ourselves on voting. Next year is 2021, and we hope to see you there alive and well. Thank you very much.